Hello everybody, my name is Happy and I'd like to welcome you all to my history reaction channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at what a Wild West duel really looked like by History Dose. As always, I'll include a link to the original video in the description down below. If you enjoy what you see here, please head over to History Dose. Show them a little love and appreciation for the efforts that they put into this video. These two brothers do an amazing job. I always like to encourage people to support them. They put way too much work into this. All right, this is one of their shorter videos, but that's okay. Let's find out what the Wild West duels were really like, because what we see in the Hollywood movies and in all the classic Western genre literature is, and the dime novels that come before that for that matter, is largely mythological in nature. Not to say that there weren't gunfights at high noon in the center of town. There may very well have been, but that would have been absolutely the exception, not the rule. In fact, I'm aware of only one fight that I'm aware of that even comes close to that cliche. And even it's not really, it doesn't even really fit the cliche that well. So let's find out what History Dose has for us here.
It's July 1865 in Springfield, Missouri. The gunfighter Wild Bill Hickok loses his favorite gold watch in a poker game to Dave Tutt, a gambler who's also been flirting with an old flame of his.
I said there was only one that I was aware of that fits the stereotype. Even remotely, and even it doesn't. This would be the one I was thinking of. I have done some digging into Wild Bill Hickok and Calamity Jane, his alleged lover, although he never really saw it that way, but I think she did. In any case, I've been to where they're buried in Deadwood, South Dakota, and to several sites associated with both of them. And yeah, this one is about as close as you're going to get to a real classic Western gunfight, and by real classic, I mean the kind that you will see in the movies. But like I said, it's not even really that close when you really get down to it. It's much more like a traditional pistol duel.
Wild Bill hears that the next day Tutt plans to further humiliate him by showing off his watch in the middle of town. That day, Wild Bill walks into the town square, revolver in hand, and spots Tutt with his watch. The townspeople disperse and the two men stand alone, 75 yards apart.
Roughly, give or take a few
yards.
From
here, it's a classic quick-draw duel. The men stand sideways with their guns cocked, hands hovering over their holsters. They reach for their guns and fire at the same time. Tutt misses badly, but Wild Bill doesn't.
What they actually did, most of it they got right. They encounter each other on the streets. I believe Wild Bill Hickok, if I'm remembering the story correctly, called out to him something about the watch, and then as they line up for this, basically a duel. They did have both guns cocked in their holster, but it was not a quick draw scenario at all. In fact, if you read the eyewitness accounts to this, they'll be talking, for example, about Wild Bill Hickok taking the time to rest his pistol on an upraised arm in order to take sight and get a good shot off. There was a quick draw element in that they were waiting to see who would go first, who would make the first move, and it was Tutt. But this was never a classic quick draw in the traditional sense. This was a situation where they were waiting to see who would make the first move. Tutt draws first, they both take careful aim, and they do take careful aim just as the duelist would. And they both fire roughly the same time. Hickok hits, Tutt doesn't.
He shoots Tutt between his ribs, killing him.
Yep. In fact, I believe Tutt cried out, "Men or boys, I'm dead," or something to that effect.
That's one of the only quick-draw duels we can historically verify. Since the 1860s, Wild West fiction has convinced many people that cowboys spent a good chunk of their time dueling. Cheap fictional books called dime novels, newspapers, and later comics and films took real-life gunfighters like Wild Bill Hickok and Wyatt Earp and exaggerated their stories.
Yep.
Cowboys became folk heroes, noble gunslingers shooting down bad guys on the lawless frontier. But there's actually a lot of debate among historians about how violent the Wild West really was. The numbers say American frontier towns were extraordinarily homicidal.
Yes, but those numbers are skewed. We're talking, those are often based on statistics. So if you take a city of, say 1860, take a city like New York or Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, some of these cities that had large populations at the time. One murderer out of 10,000 is insignificant, statistically speaking. If you go out west to some place like, say, Abilene or Deadwood, where there might be somewhere between 500 to 1,000 people, one murderer is suddenly a much bigger percentage of that population. So someplace like, say, New York might have a 1.3% homicide rate. A place like Abilene or Dodge City, Deadwood, South Dakota, you might see, or even worse, some of the smaller towns, one murderer can be just a handful of murderers can turn that into a 2, 3, 4% pretty quickly over the course of a year. And my numbers are not great, okay, because in a city like New York, you might actually end up, because of the high population, having like a 0.1% murder, or someplace like Dodge, you might have a 1% murder, which is 10 times worse, but that's because of the way the numbers break down because of the smaller populations. All you need is one or two crazy people out there, or violent people, or just drunken encounters to really jack up the number in terms of percent of the population.
But as Robert Dijkstra points out, the stats can be misleading since we calculate homicide rate by homicides per 100,000 people, meaning that one freak homicide in a 500-person frontier town could give you an absurdly high crime rate. Depending on when and where you restrict your sample, you could wind up with homicide rates from 0 to over 1,000. However, even conservative estimates say that the Old West was about as murderous as today's most violent U.S. cities. And this makes sense. Gangs of bandits roamed the frontier, and law enforcement was often weak or corrupt.
Right.
Cowboys had a role in this violence as well. Skilled gunfighters found work as protection men for cattle companies. Before the days of vast fenced-in ranches, these cowboys rode along the distant edges of ranches and shot cattle thieves on sight. But most important,
I was not expecting that. That did happen. There's even oral tradition that happened here where I live. I haven't been able to find any actual documentation of it in terms of first-hand accounts written at the time from people who said they saw it. But there's been long-standing oral tradition of cattle ranchers ambushing and shooting down a bunch of cattle rustlers here in town, and I actually believe it's probably true, but it was at a time when the town was small enough that the citizens of the town probably deliberately kept it hush-hush. Anyway, that's beside the point. It did happen, no question about it, but not as often as this kind of implies. It depended where you were and when you were, and how much of a local law presence there was. If you lived in an area that had a fairly good sheriff and a support team for the sheriff, this probably wouldn't have happened as much, if at all. If you get in some of the more remote areas, especially way out in the remote areas, then yeah, sometimes that was the only choice you had. You either let them get away with it or you took the law into your own hands. But it's still not anything like you see in the movie. it was not anywhere near that common.
Certainly, the Wild West combined a culture of gambling and drinking with a bunch of gun-wielding men.
Yes.
The occasional drunken shootout was inevitable.
However, what they don't mention here, and we need to take this into account, is that especially when you had a good lawman in the town, they would often disarm people coming into town. Only deputized men were allowed to carry their firearms in town. So if you get someplace like Dodge City, or even Abilene, a lot of times, the classic example would be Wyatt Earp and the brothers, Morgan and the rest, along with Doc Holliday. When they had that gunfight at OK Corral, the Earps were the lawmen in town, or Morgan was the head, and yeah, they were disarming people that came into town. And one of the problems was the gang known as the Cowboys refused to be disarmed. So yeah, the idea that everybody in the Wild West wore guns is also part of the myth. Now, that depends largely on where you are and who's in charge and how good they are at their job. But this idea that especially strangers in town would just be able to go to the local saloon wearing their six-shooters, not necessarily accurate.
That's how a lot of violence in the Old West happened. Gunfights were almost never honorable.
Was that a scene from The Dark Tower? I'm not even going to comment on that.
Planned out duels. They were spontaneous and sloppy. Even
Yes.
Wild Bill Hickok's story doesn't end in a quick draw duel. He beats Jack McCall in poker, and the next day McCall gets drunk, pushes through the saloon doors, pulls out a revolver, and shoots him while his back is turned.
Yep. What is it with Wild Bill Hickok and getting into gunfights over card games? The Tutt one, he lost his watch at a card game, and that started it. Here, he's playing cards when he's shot in the back. But yeah, I've actually been to the site to where that happened in Deadwood. There is a recreation of the saloon, the number 10 saloon. It was originally, at the time that Wild Bill Hickok was killed, it was named after two individuals. I don't remember the name. It was like a Tutter or something close to Tutt, actually, and something else. But later was renamed the number 10 saloon. Now, the number 10 saloon is still in Deadwood. You can go visit it, but it's not the original. It's not even in the original location. The original location still exists, but it is Wild Bill's. It's a shop of some kind. I don't remember the full name now. It's like Wild Bill's Emporium or something like that. Don't remember. It's been so long. It might have changed again since I've been there. Because I haven't been there in probably a good 15, 20 years. But you can visit the actual place he was killed and a recreation of where he was killed. And the recreation does supposedly at least have some of the original furniture that was in the old saloon number 10. Or whatever it was called when Doc was killed there. But yeah, he was shot in the back.
Robert DeArmond writes that Wild West gunfights were generally sudden, impromptu affairs, and gunfighters took every advantage available.
Oh yeah.
When Langford farmer Peel got into a gunfight over a gambling match, he and his opponent shot each other until they ran out of bullets. Then Peel, with 3 bullets in him, crawled to his opponent and won the duel by stabbing him in the chest with a Bowie knife. Peel recovered, but he lived and died by this kind of no-rules gunfighting. One night at a saloon, he got into an argument with outlaw John Bull. Peel challenged Bull to a duel, but Bull said he needed to go up to his room to get his gun. Eventually, Peel assumed Bull was too afraid to fight and left to see his mistress across the street. She held Peel's right arm while they walked. Suddenly, Bull emerged from the saloon with his gun in hand. Peel tried to grab his own gun, but the woman was still clutching his shooting arm. Bull fired 3 bullets past the mistress and killed Peel. Fiction gets the Wild West duel wrong. Duels weren't formal, clean, or honorable. The people of the frontier were human. They drank booze,
Yes.
broke the law, and lost their temper. The gunfights that actually happened often involved alcohol, gambling, and cheap shots, which is more appropriate for a place called the Wild West.
Yep. And that's pretty true.
So thanks for tuning
right.
in to another History Dose episode. If you like,
A little shorter than I expected, but I should have known that because I should have seen the time. But still good. And I think he makes some great points there. There's this unrealistic belief in how these gunfights happened. Now, would there have been formal duels? There probably would have been, although this is much later in history. And the age of formal duels, as you might see, for example, in the time of Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr, which was already illegal, at least where they were doing it, or where they were living anyway. They had to sneak over to another area, another state, in order to do it. By this time, legal duels would have been a thing of the past for the most part. So this idea of these formalized duels just really wasn't a thing anymore. But yeah, in the Wild West, a lot more, the gun violence would have been spontaneous. It would have been whatever it takes to win. There would have not been typically any honor in it. That just wasn't really a thing. Could it happen? Sure. It would have been very much the exception. If you were going to fight somebody, you wanted every edge you could get, and you'd take it, like you just saw in that last one. And you look closely at all the famous, well-known gun battles like the gunfight at OK Corral, you find that none of them play out like you would imagine from what we see on the movies, or we read in those dime novels, or even a lot of the Western fiction. Occasionally you'll get a movie that does it right, but they're the exception. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that, and we'll be back tomorrow for some more videos. Until then, thank you for joining me. Bye-bye.